And I'll apologize. I want to go back to section 6 of your report, in doc ID 78620. And I didn't really have a chance to look at some of that language when you were discussing it. I'm going to take a closer look at the last sentence of section 6.0. You see it said, do you see the last sentence there?
Yes, I do.
Does it say anything about when an update will be required?
No.
Does it
And
say?
there's no regulatory timeline for that.
And does it say anything about what to do if kind of no update is needed?
No, it doesn't.
Have any further questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Astor. Mr. Nolan? Thank you, Mr. Nolan. DEQ, I didn't mean to overlook you. Any questions? Stinson, I'm going to go really broad brush on you if I could.
Great.
So I've been sitting here now for 2.5 days, listening to this testimony. I guess the ultimate question I have is the one that I had from Mr. Sadler, which is, we have the rule, we have all these requirements, but what's the point? What are you trying to, what's the ultimate goal? What are you trying to accomplish in terms of all these site assessments, trying to map everything? What's the purpose behind it?
My piece.
Oh, that's why I'm asking your opinion.
Puzzle is to ensure that with regard to groundwater, that you're monitoring the facility such that you're able to determine whether or not it's impacting groundwater.
And part of it, would you agree, is to determine whether or not a particular site or a particular cell is suitable for a landfill?
Yes, that's part of what we looked at.
In other words, and I'll use this as a hypothetical example for the new class 4 cell that opened. If your studies indicated that there were just huge voids underneath that particular location, I'm assuming somebody with FDM would have told Waste Management, hey, take this particular location from the landfill off the map. It's not going to be a good spot to start loading waste onto it. Is that right?
I mean, ethically, we would have to tell Waste Management, and we wouldn't be able to report otherwise to DEQ.
Would you agree or disagree with me that one of the primary reasons, and again, this is just me sitting here for the last 2.5 days, is there have been indications, glimmers, that there may be some karst features, voids underneath this particular location. But the recent 2022 dye test that was undertaken that manifested itself in Wildcat Creek is really the catalyst for the reason that you're here. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
maybe not the entire reason.
Why I'm here, but that's not why this hearing is.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So once you or any of your colleagues saw the results of that test, did that cause you some concern? Were you surprised? Was it expected? What was your perception of that result?
Well, I think Bill Sadler encapsulated that
And he did
accurately. It was like, oh, you called them glimmers, this confirmed data. Now looking here with hindsight, okay, well, that confirmed that detection. I mean, it's always better to have a known, right, than unknown. So that was good in that regard, but you know, it's another pathway. So
So once that dye test was done and it been confirmed that there was some sort of a preferential pathway, why didn't you attempt to do a dye test in the proposed class 1 location?
well, because there had been repeated dye tests done already, there are several dye tests that showed proven confirmed flow paths that crossed that area from the active class 1 landfill across the proposed expansion area and down past the closed class 1 area. So it had been a study that had been done multiple times and confirmed, you know, each subsequent test reconfirmed the southeasterly flow direction in that area. So in our mind, doing another dye study would not be additive to the body of evidence for that expansion area.
Let me put words in your mouth. Another dye study in the proposed class 1 cell, in your opinion, would have been redundant.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you recall the question I had for Mr. Hart, and maybe I asked Mr. Sadler. I don't recall if I did or not, which is the fact that this is an active landfill, the fact that there are thousands of tons of trash sitting and solid waste sitting on this site. In your professional opinion, can that alter or change the hydrology or geology of a site over time?
I'm not entirely sure where this question or why it's being asked. The presence of the weight of the landfill is not going to change the direction of groundwater flow beneath it in this particular setting. If let's say it was located in an area with a really deep deposit of highly plastic clays, then perhaps it could cause a change in the groundwater flow direction because the induced load from that landfill would apply a pressure to the clays, and because they don't transmit water readily, it would increase the pore water pressures in that clay, and that could cause like an induced radial flow. But here, you know, because of the geology, that's not going to happen. Water is going to be able to it's not going to have an effect.
So Mr. Hart's testimony that the 9 different seeps and springs that you've got listed here on, what is it, your petitioner's 9, I believe, were overlooked by somebody in the past.
Not necessarily. I mean, again, it's
well, they never appeared on a different, and they never appeared on another map or.
Well, first of all, I don't know that those are persistent seeps.
Okay.
It could be that they weren't expressing themselves due to whatever precipitation, weather conditions at the time. And it just happens that I had a conversation with Jody Reynolds, and we were discussing those. And evidently that area used to be covered in thorny briars. So it was densely vegetated with some sort of thorny plant.
What you're telling me is,
so
I should be asking her.
You may want to. They've
okay.
done some work, and so it was accessible for us.
Okay. Are you apprised of what is going on at the landfill today? That's a bad question. No?
No.
So you're not familiar with the operation or anything in terms of what is happening out at the landfill as we sit here today?
No, I mean, I haven't.
And the reason I ask is, so from the perspective of, again, hypothetically speaking, Mr. Hart talked about additional tests and dye studies that were necessary to characterize this site. From the new class 4 perspective, which is where the dye test was done, I assume, I don't know for a fact, and it may be somebody else I need to ask this question, and maybe Mr. Conrad, or maybe I should have asked Mr. Small, that there already has been a liner laid down at that site. They are already depositing solid waste at that site. So once the liner is laid down, the ability to do a dye test at that spot becomes impossible, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
Can I back up
Sure,
a little bit just to explain the process that we went through for that dye study?
sure.
So our method of introducing dye involved a trench, which hadn't been done before. Using the assistance of waste management, site operators, we dug, 6 trenches in the class 4 expansion in the footprint. Added, 1,000+ gallons of potable water to each of those trenches. And what we were doing there is kind of like an informal perk test. We wanted to see if those trenches would transmit the water into we were targeting the epicarst so that we were sure that our dye would hit a more permeable layer as opposed to having our dye sit in that clayey regolith and not go anywhere. So we dug 6 trenches, introduced water to all of them, and we had to keep on moving further and further north because none of the trenches that we dug transmitted water. The water just went in there and sat. Now, mind you, we were digging 20, 25 feet deep all the way to the top of bedrock, which is not a condition that would exist beneath the class 4 landfill because they're required to maintain 10 feet of separation. So, so our study didn't really replicate any real scenario in terms of the landfill. It was simply a data point that shows a potential direction of groundwater flow. The actual trench location was just right at the northern limits of the class 4 footprint and might have been just beyond it. I'm not really sure. Looking at the site map, I'd have to look at that survey data point in closer detail. So really, we did all our planning, and where we wanted to inject was an unsuitable location because the potable water didn't drain from our trench. It didn't go anywhere. So does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely. So I guess if I can encapsulate testimony, what you're saying is you could conceivably do another dye test, not within the footprint itself, if the liner's been laid down, but somewhere up
close
just
to
on
it.
the parameter.
Right. And yes,
The same question with the class 1, which is frankly one of the more unusual cells I've ever seen. It looks like a boomerang, a very narrow boomerang. You don't know what the status of that cell is, whether or not they've laid a liner down on that or anything of that nature, right?
I don't know the exact status. I know that they have been authorized to construct it. I think the liner is in the process of being, I don't know the details.
So, but that one is, from a perspective of doing another dye test, at least in my mind, would be even more problematic because you have cells and waste on both sides in a very narrow area. And if a liner has been laid down there, I don't know where you could.
I mean, you could do it adjacent to the footprint, but again, there are multiple dye tray studies that have shown proven pathways across it. So I don't find that another study would be additive.
Again, I'm looking at it from the practicality aspects, the actual physical practicality aspects of what can and cannot be done out there at this juncture. Mr. Hart's testimony about, you've already answered about the necessity of additional dye tests. I think you've answered the necessity of additional monitoring wells. One of his opinions was that it would be important or even necessary to go beyond the 2-mile radius to do mapping. He suggested 3 miles. In your testimony, I don't think that was addressed. Do you think that's necessary? And if you don't think it's necessary, why isn't it necessary?
I don't think it's necessary. I think he was recommending that based on the 1989 EPA document, which again is not a RCRA document. And so there are complications with that, but I don't have any reason to think that's a good idea, aside from the fact that that would not be in agreement with what the most current EPA guidance recommends. And that's, I mean, and we, by Rule 22, we have to follow the most recent EPA guidance document, right? So, but the landfill's monitoring system has been proven on multiple occasions to work, despite the fact that every single well out there hasn't been proven by a dye study. I mentioned the chloride tracking that we did in association with the phase 3 NEI, but also there are wells, so they are in corrective action because of landfill gas, not because of a leachate migration problem. And there are wells out there that have detected the landfill gas migration that are not on Mr. Hart's list. Now, so they are doing their job, and Waste Management has monitoring wells placed that are based on the conceptual site model, not they're not random.
So you mentioned the EPA guidance, and I don't know if you recall when I was questioning Mr. Hart, Mr. Sadler about this slips being part of Rule 22. As I read Rule 22, there are various references to CFRs being incorporated into the rule, express CFRs. That's federal regulation. That's in Rule 22. And you're right, there is one reference about incorporating recent EPA guidance. But as I read it, it has to do with the evaluation of the monitoring data, not the actual where you put wells, how you I'm cutting you off. Can you answer that?
Right. Well, the whole point of the monitoring system is to collect data and evaluate it for landfill impacts. So the location of where you're collecting that data is important to to the statistical analysis of that data to determine whether or not.
I understand, but the previous sections of Rule 22 don't expressly incorporate the most recent guidance. As I read it, and again, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again. The only reference I see to it is statistical methods to be used in evaluating groundwater monitoring data for each constituent. So it appears to be analytically oriented, not necessarily where you put them, how many you put. Something?
Yes, in order for the statistics themselves to be meaningful, they have to be representative of the system that they're designed to monitor. I don't think you can take that one thing and say, well, this applies to just the statistics, but nothing else. I mean, if you have monitoring wells that are monitoring if you have monitoring wells that are being impacted by anything other than the unit that they were designed to monitor, they're not going to meet the requirements of the statistics that are being run.
So if you, as you said here today, tell me that the most recent EPA guidance for, I don't know if it's going to be titled the same way, groundwater monitoring in karst terrains, is it titled the same?
The EPA guidance?
Yes.
It's the 2009 Unified Groundwater Monitoring.
Your testimony is it has been incorporated into Rule 22, the most recent guidance, correct?
The most recent EPA guidance, well, by what you just read,
No.
that's what we,
The most recent EPA guidance. Whatever the date was, 2000 and what?
2009.
2009. I don't have that. I haven't seen it. So there's a gap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's a really thick, I'm sure Bill and Jenny have it on their desk. It's very thick. It covers everything from, the purpose behind groundwater monitoring, the purpose behind the statistics, where monitoring wells should be placed with regard to the unit being regulated. And then it discusses detection monitoring statistics, assessment monitoring statistics, corrective action, so on and so forth. It's comprehensive. It's from, basically beginning to end for a monitoring system and a monitoring program.
So does the 2009 EPA guidance differ dramatically from the 1989 guidance that's been marked as petitioners 5?
That's not guidance. I don't think it says guidance in the title, does it? Says groundwater monitoring in karst terrains, recommended protocols, and implicit assumptions. I don't see this as being a RCRA guidance document for groundwater. It doesn't say. And also it predates.
Okay. Last question, Mr. Hart's opinion that testing or monitoring of residents' springs or drinking water wells is necessary or should be done. What's your opinion about that?
He doesn't have hasn't shown any data to suggest that that's warranted. He hasn't shown any information that the residents' groundwater wells are connected hydrologically to the water beneath the landfill.
I think his testimony was if you do additional dye tests, I don't know whether or not he said that would be part and parcel of that, or whether or not that should direct whether or not they should be sampling these private residences' wells. Do you recall?
Do I what?
Do you recall?
Do I recall him saying that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So was he essentially saying, "I'm strike that"? All right, council. That's all the questions I have. Any questions from you based on my line, Mr. Nolan?
No.
Mr. Heister? Is it truly going to be a couple, Mr. Heister?
I'm not gonna walk to that one this time. What were the conditions like when FTN's team went out to perform their field survey that identified the seeps/springs that were identified in your report?
It was rainy.
And have you seen any evidence in the record that any of those seeps or springs exist during the dry season?
I've not seen it. And that's not something that we looked into, but we weren't required to by the rule.
Thank you.
Nolan? EQ? All right, ma'am, thank you very much for your testimony. It is 30. We'll go ahead and break for lunch, come back at 1:30. We are off the record. Wow, she had a serious hiccup then. Are we going to finish today? Yeah, we are. Okay, good deal. All right, councilors, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, John.
Okay, we're back on the record. Mr. Heister, go ahead and please call your next witness.
Eco-Vista calls Melissa Vaught to the stand.
Well, how are you? Good. Would you be so kind as to raise your right hand? You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this hearing is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please have a seat.
Ms. Vaught, could you please introduce yourself for the record?
Ms. Vaught, would you be so kind as to take that seat? No, it's fine. Perfect. Go ahead, Mr. Heister.
I'm an environmental engineer with FTN Associates
And where do you currently reside, Ms. Vaught?
in Fayetteville.
How long have you been a professional engineer?
About 13 years.
And could you give the judge just a general feel for your educational background?
I have a bachelor's of science in chemical engineering from the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville.
How long have you been a licensed engineer?
About 13 years.
And can you give the judge just a general feel for your work experience up to today?
I've been with FTN since 2018, doing solid waste permitting, as well as compliance for landfills, stormwater, industrial wastewater permitting and compliance work. Prior to FTN, I worked for other consulting firms in a couple different states doing similar work.
Was that similar work also on other landfills?
Yes.
What involvement have you had with the Eco-Vista site in particular?
I helped with the groundwater monitoring for a year or so. I also was the project manager for the Class 1 and Class 4 permit applications.
And could you tell the judge what a project manager for those applications does?
So there's a lot of different pieces that go into it, a team of people on FTN side, as well as subcontractors and people with waste management. So I help to coordinate different aspects of it to make sure everyone had what information they needed, knew their deadlines and the timeframes we needed stuff. And I help pull together pieces in the end.
And that permit application is in the record at 82573. Did you prepare any specific parts of the Class 1 permit application yourself?
I did all of the written plans. I helped to update and prepare.
Did the facility already have plans in place when you began to work on the project?
Yes, it's an existing facility. They had gone through other permit modifications. So when we started on the permit application project, we pulled the last version of the plans and reviewed those and updated those.
Is the prior version of the plan that you pulled one that had been approved by DEQ?
Yes.
Did you have any involvement in DEQ's preliminary site investigation in 2018?
Yes, I was on site when it was conducted.
And can you briefly explain to the judge what kind of your involvement was in DEQ's preliminary site investigation?
So in general, a preliminary site investigation is done by DEQ once they determine a pre-application is technically complete. They want to go on site and dig test pits to see what sort of soils are there, what conditions are there. So for this, I was present to witness those test pits.
And just so the record is clear, we have DEQ's September 26, 2018 interoffice memo with respect to its site investigation. That's in 82573. I've turned to page 7 of the report. Can you briefly tell us what we're looking at here?
So it's an aerial of the landfill. There are 4 red circles indicating the 4 test pits that were done. They're labeled ADQ C4 TP1, for example. The C4 refers to the class expansion, and the 2 on the right, the C1, TP1 and 2 refer to the test pits for the class 1 expansion.
Did you personally observe those excavations?
Yes, I did.
So I've turned to page 18 of DEQ's report. Explain to the court what we're looking at.
The subject at the bottom says it's for the C1 TP2. So this was a test pit that was installed in the class 1 expansion area. It would have been the southern one. And it shows an excavated test pit with a measuring tape running down the left-hand side to measure how deep the test pit was.
Do you recall anyone else who was present with you to observe this?
There was another engineer with FTN. DEQ was on site as well as Waste Management.
Did you hear anyone in the process of this say anything about observing any evidence of voids or sinkholes?
No.
Ms. Vaught, I'm going to ask you to turn your attention now to another part of document ID 82573 in Appendix G. Can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
What are we looking at?
This is the operating plan that was included in the permit modification application.
And I see it's got a seal on it. Whose seal was that?
I did.
Did you prepare the permit application yourself based on Rule 22?
Yes,
To the best of your knowledge, did the application address all of Rule 22's requirements for a Class 1 permit?
yes,
Did you omit anything from that application that you've included in other facilities' Class 1 permits?
no,
I'm going to turn your attention first to page 1-2 in section 1.7. Do you see where it addresses requirements under Rule 22.411F?
yes.
I want to turn to the last of these bullet points, open burn. Do you see that?
Yes,
Was this prohibition in the pre-existing operations plan?
yes.
What did you do to confirm that, if anything, to confirm that this remains an accurate statement?
After we drafted the operating plan, we sent it to Waste Management for review.
Were you asked to make any changes to the discussion of open burning there?
No,
Just so it's on the record, with respect to section 1.8, did you draft that to comply with Rule 22.411G?
yes,
And did you run this language by Eco-Vista?
yes.
And did Eco-Vista ask for any changes that you didn't make?
I'm sorry, what was the end of that?
Is the language in section 1.8 consistent with what Eco-Vista told you?
Yes,
Okay, I'm going to turn to section 1.12 for a second. Do you see where it says it's addresses Rule 22.411K?
yes,
I want to take, do you see the language for 22.411K up on the screen?
yes,
Okay. Does the operations plan address whether the owner or operator has an adequate telephone communication system in the event of a fire or other emergency situations?
yes,
And does the operations plan include a written emergency response plan?
yes.
And what, if anything, did you do to confirm both of those points with Eco-Vista?
We submitted the draft of the plan to them for review.
Does Rule 22.411K have any requirement for the creation of a fire response plan?
No,
Do you know, it's like that. Can you just give us a general sense of the kind of emergencies that a Class 1 solid waste facility might experience?
it's an industrial facility, so it could be several different things, a spill, a health emergency, one of their workers injuring themselves or having a medical condition, a weather emergency, or a fire.
Gone back to the operations plan itself. Do you see at the bottom, where it says the emergency action plan is provided in attachment B?
Yes,
Is the emergency action plan provided in attachment B?
yes.
I've turned now to attachment B to the operations plan. We're still on document ID 82573. Is there a difference between an emergency action plan and an emergency response plan?
No, it's just a terminology.
And did Eco-Vista have an emergency response plan before you became involved in the permit renewal application?
Yes,
And had that prior plan been approved by DEQ?
yes.
To the best of your knowledge, had the requirements under Rule 22-411K changed between the prior application and the application on which you were working?
No,
So could you walk through with us kind of what you did with respect to the, I guess, the pre-existing emergency response plan that was in the prior permit application?
we would have reviewed it as a whole, but looked to update the information that needed to change, contact information, phone numbers, making sure the route to the hospital was still accurate, or the quickest route, things like that.
So you mentioned confirming the accuracy of phone numbers. Are these the phone numbers you were discussing?
Yes,
And what are we looking at now at the end of the emergency response plan?
the map showing the quickest route to the nearest hospital from the landfill.
I now want to turn your attention to section 1.16 of the operations plan. It's on page 1-5. Were you involved in the preparation of the discussion of the cover requirements in the operations plan?
Yes,
And if you look at 1.16.2, were these sections drafted to meet the requirements of Rule 22.413?
yes,
And did you have anyone at Eco-Vista review the cover requirements in the draft application?
yes.
And did you make any changes? Did they request any changes?
Not that I recall.
I want to turn your attention now to section 7.3, where the operations plan addresses section 22.416 of the rule. And I know we already talked about this, but I want to talk about it specifically in the context of Rule 22.416. Does the Eco-Vista facility prohibit open burning?
Yes,
And does the Eco-Vista facility apply the periodic or engage in the periodic application of cover material.
Yes.
Mr. Heister,
That's right.
Mr. Nolan's not objecting, but I'm getting really close to swearing you in.
I-
I understand you're trying to expedite things, but all she's doing is saying yes or no to your questions because they're all leading.
Oh, Your Honor, leading is allowed for foundational facts. I think these
Yeah.
qualify as foundation.
I don't
And those
disagree
are
with that, but
facts.
this is a little more than foundation, Mr. Heister.
I will. I put rule 22.422 up in front of you. Could you read that for us?
Operating plan and narrative? You want-
Yourself.
Okay. Okay.
Did the operating plan that you prepared meet the requirements of rule 422?
Yes.
Are the rule 22 requirements that we've discussed under 411 and 416 the same for all class 1 facilities?
Yes.
And how does Eco-Vista's plan to meet those requirements compared to other class 1 facilities in your experience?
It's standard, very similar.
All right, we're still within document 82573. Specifically, I'm going to be turning to the design standards in the operations plan. Just so you all can follow along with me, we're actually looking at the class 1 permit application, not the operations plan. And specifically, we're looking at 617 of the application. Do you see that, Ms. Watt?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the design requirements of rule 22.425?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the design of the Eco-Vista class 1 expansion area?
Yes.
Does the design of the Eco-Vista class 1 expansion area meet the requirements of rule 22.425?
Yes.
Okay, now I want to ask you to look briefly with me at the design report that's attached to the application, and that's Appendix H to the application, which is doc ID 82573. Can you see the cover of the design report there?
Yes.
Can you briefly just give the judge an understanding of what this document does from an engineering perspective?
So there's a number of calculations that go into the permit modification to design the landfill cell, the landfill expansion area. And so this pulls together all those pieces. It would go through the liner components again, include things like an airspace calculation, an earthwork balance to make sure they have enough soil on site, slope stability calculations, settlement. All those pieces are in this appendix.
And would this appendix include details regarding the construction and composition of the double liner for this class 1 expansion?
Yes.
Were you here yesterday for Mr. Conrad's testimony?
Yes.
Did you see when he showed some of the samples of the material that make up some of the different components of the liner?
Yes.
Okay. There are some components of, first of all, when we say liner, what do we mean by that?
The constructed bottom of a landfill cell.
Okay, could you give me a little more detail on what are the parts of the constructed bottom of the landfill cell?
They're shown in this detail. Starting from the bottom, you'll have a compacted clay layer that makes up at the bottom of the secondary liner at Eco-Vista. Above that is a HDPE geomembrane liner. Then, since it's a double composite system, there's a leak detection layer that consists of a geocomposite. Above that, Eco-Vista uses a geosynthetic clay liner instead of another soil layer, which is overlaid by another HDPE geomembrane liner. You have the leachate collection system, which is another geocomposite, and then 12 inches of protective cover.
Okay, so what is the protective cover made up of?
They use on-site soil, just a material that helps to protect the underlying layers beneath it.
So is it true that, so would that protective layer be in place before any solid waste is placed on the liner?
Yes.
So what direction would rainwater come from?
Above the protective cover.
And does the name for rainwater change after it comes in contact with solid waste?
Yes, once precipitation touches waste, it's considered leachate.
Okay, and so when the leachate hits the protective layer, where does it go?
Well, there'd be daily cover, you'd have waste, protective cover, it would infiltrate that to the leachate collection system, which is the first geocomposite you see, and that would transmit it through piping and to the lowest point in the cell, which is the sump, and then it gets pumped out to their leachate storage tank, which then goes to the NACA wastewater treatment plant.
Is the volume of leachate that's collected through the leachate collection system monitored in any way?
Yes.
Okay, and so we see next there's so if there were hypothetically from a physical perspective, how does one breach a liner that is covered by 10 or more feet of solid waste on the top and rock and bedrock below?
There'd have to be some sort of puncture through the waste through the protective cover through the liner system.
And do you have any sense for how deep some of the solid waste is on top of these double liners out at Eco-Vista?
That is not something I've looked at recently.
That's fair. So if something managed to penetrate the solid waste and the protective cover and the geocomposite and the 60 mil geomembrane, what would it encounter next?
It would hit the geosynthetic clay liner.
And let's assume for the sake of argument that it migrated through that.
Okay.
What would it encounter next?
Then there's the leak detection system. So any liquid there also gets monitored. And so that volume would be noted.
Do you have any feel for how frequently the leachate collection system or the leak detection system are monitored?
Daily, I'm pretty sure. I believe it's written in their permit, daily during the week, and then not on the weekends or holidays.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Swat.
Thank you, Mr. Heister. PQ, Ms. Thompson, Ms. Sargent, any questions? Mr. No.
Scott, have you been primarily responsible for developing a groundwater monitoring plan before the Eco-Vista facility?
No,
Do you have any experience with landfills and karst other than Eco-Vista?
no,
Did you review the 1996 DiTRACE study before submitting this permit application and groundwater monitoring plan?
no,
Did you review the 2001 to 2005 studies before submitting the permit application?
no,
Did you review the 2012 to 2014 information developed before submitting this permit application?
with regards to the DiTRACE studies,
Yes.
no,
Were you familiar with the 2020 investigation report documenting 16 new springs before submitting the permit application?
yes,
Does that identify this document?
it is my deposition from December 13th, 2023.
I'm gonna read the question on line 19, excuse me. Line 22, if you'll read the answer on 24, I appreciate that. Are you at all familiar with its findings of 16 additional or previously unidentified springs or seeds in the area? What was your answer?
No,
Did you help with the groundwater well survey conducted in this area?
I did. I helped to, I think initially mail out the letters, property owners, and then assimilate that data as we received it back.
Did you make any recommendation to Eco-Vista or DEQ to include any of those sites in a monitoring plan?
No,
Did you review any studies or papers on karst and monitoring before submitting the plan and application?
no,
Do you have any internal or FTN guidance regarding monitoring in karst?
no,
Did you review any EPA guidance before developing the monitoring plan and submitting this permit application?
no,
Did you review any prior groundwater monitoring results before updating the monitoring plan for this site?
I don't recall. I mean, we were helping groundwater monitoring at points in the process. we included a version of the groundwater monitoring plan in the permit application, and then we since revised it after issuance of the permit. The second version, I don't believe, that I reviewed any of their more recent data for that.
Line 2 of your deposition. Question is, did you review any prior groundwater monitoring results before updating the monitoring plan for the site? And what is your answer?
Not that I remember. Again, I don't, without going back to it, I think that was for the update, the version we submitted in 2023.
Who determines the adequacy of a groundwater monitoring network?
The certifying professional geologist, or in concert with DEQ.
Okay, thank you. You recall working on section 5.0, the operational standards that were submitted with the July 6th, 2021 permit application.
5.0 is in the initial report. I'm sorry.
Yes, it's in the earlier part of the document.
Okay.
It's not an appendix. That's your question.
Yes.
5.1.11 is communications and emergency response.
Sorry, Mr. Goffin, just hold on.
He didn't like it yesterday, so I'm gonna wait a moment.
Good to go, sir.
All right. Gonna start again for a moment. For our phone call. Try again in this slide. I have here the operating plan and narrative. And that's your stamp right there.
Yes.
And this is from document 80454. States here the landfill is operated in a manner that does not pose a fire hazard to personal property. Do you recall writing that language?
I didn't write it specifically that I recall. It was an existing plan. So I would have reviewed it and made sure it met the rule and didn't need to change based on the expansion.
Do you have any idea who wrote the language regarding fire in the operations plan?
No, I do not.
Next sentence, which we've talked about quite a bit, is the Tawnytown Fire Department is under an agreement to respond to an Eco-Vista fire call as soon as possible. Do you have any idea who might have written that sentence?
No.
Do you have any idea if that agreement actually exists?
No.
Do you know if who prepared this language regarding fire and the operational standard has any fire expertise or training?
I do not.
Did you personally do any investigation into fire control and response resources available before stamping this plan?
No.
You didn't go out and look at the site, determine where a fire hydrant is?
Not with regard to that plan. No.
Talk about cover for a moment. Did you investigate the cover options used by the facility as they relate to fire?
As they relate to fire, no. We would have reviewed what they had for alternate daily cover as well as soil cover and incorporated that into the plan.
Did you make any investigation into the propensities of rust foam
and how it interacts with fire, or possibly used as a suppressant?
No,
What about auto shredder fluff? Did you look into its flammable characteristics or what happens when a fire occurs when auto shredder fluff is used as cover?
no,
So it's safe to say there's nothing in the plan regarding how to respond to an auto shredder fluff fire,
that's correct.
or what, if any, role rust foam might play? It's not accounted for in the plan.
No,
Is determining the sufficient number of monitoring wells in a network outside of your expertise?
yes,
Do you have any idea which direction the groundwater is flowing at this facility?
after the past couple of days, yes,
All right, well then prior to the last few days, and how about this, when you submitted the permit application, did you have an understanding of groundwater flow at the facility?
no,
Did you have an understanding of transport time at the time you submitted the permit application?
no,
Did you review any incident reports, either from the city of Town, ADEQ, or Waste Management regarding fire incidents at the facility before submitting this permit application?
no,
Did you conduct any review of firefighting equipment available at the facility prior to submitting this permit application?
no,
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Heister?
Ms. Vaught, did another professional of the FTN sign and seal the groundwater monitoring plan for the Class 1 application?
yes,
Did another professional at FTN sign and seal the part of the application addressing site hydrogeology?
yes,
Further questions?
Owen, TQ? You've been the yes, no person
yes.
up here for the last 45 minutes, and I'm not going to ask you very much at all, Ms. Vaught. Your undergraduate degree is in what again?
Chemical engineering,
And do you recall putting together an affidavit in the fall of last year in conjunction with this proceeding?
yes,
Okay. You've got paragraph 7 in that affidavit. I was personally involved in preparing the emergency action plan and the Class 1 permit application that FTN submitted to DEQ. Emergency plan was based on the prior plan for the site that Eco-Vista submitted with its prior permit application that had been approved by DEQ. It's a material similar action plan or emergency action plan that you've viewed in other, I guess, other situations. Is that right?
mm-hmm,
Okay.
other landfills in Arkansas,
All right. You didn't update or change or alter that plan from the previous iterations that existed from prior permits, correct?
correct,
Okay. And as I look at your CV, you don't have, and unless I'm missing something, you don't have any particular certification or education in firefighting, right?
that's correct.
Those are all the questions I have for you, ma'am. Hold on. Based on my line of questions, Mr. Nolan, any follow-up?
No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Heister? I apologize. I should have started with you. DEQ. Ma'am, thank you very, very much for your testimony. Mr. Heister? Oh, yes, absolutely. Anybody that, oh, well, Mr. Nolan, I apologize.
No
Yeah.
objection.
Yeah, okay. Any other witnesses that are kicking around here that feel the need to leave? Not the ones that haven't testified yet. That doesn't count. We have one more witness. Ms. Boland?
Eco-Vista calls Jody Reynolds.
And we met briefly. Would you be so kind as to raise your right hand? You swear from the testimony about the this here and it's going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Have a seat, man.
Judge Milton, I'm suddenly getting transcription on my Zoom. May I see my?
Well, before you begin, this particular witness is a complete blank slate to me because unless I've missed something, all the exhibits, affidavits, depositions, I've never seen her name. Am I missing something?
She is on the witness list, but I don't think you're missing anything.
Okay. All right. So you're going to be brand new to me. All right. Please proceed, ma'am.
So with that in mind, Ms. Reynolds, could you introduce yourself to Judge Moulton?
Yes. My name is Jody Reynolds. I'm the Environmental Protection Manager for Waste Management for the state of Arkansas, including Eco-Vista.
What are your responsibilities in that role?
As the Environmental Protection Manager, my responsibilities are to help secure permits for all of our sites, to work between ADEQ and my sites to make sure that we comply with the permits, to work between my sites and consultants to make sure that we have the plans, and we implement the plans, to meet the permit requirements of our sites.
How long have you been doing that?
I started working with waste management in 2013, so I've been there for about 10 years, and but I've been working with waste management since about 1998 in my role as a consultant too. So I've been there like a million years.
So before that, what did you get your degree in?
My degree is in biology with a minor in chemistry.
That's mine.
Is it?
When did you get that degree?
I got that degree in 1998 from Henderson State University.
And you touched on this, but what did you start doing after that?
After that, I started working with Genesis Environmental Consulting in Little Rock. They are mainly a solid waste consulting company, and then they were bought out by Terracon, and mainly did solid waste consulting, wetland delineations, stormwater consulting.
So specifically in terms of Eco-Vista, what is your role there?
At Eco-Vista, I oversee the groundwater monitoring, air monitoring, surface water monitoring, anything that has to do with environmental compliance, and ADEQ oversee those programs and permits, and work with the consultants to implement those.
How often are you out there?
I'm out there, my office is not there, but I usually go there at least 2 times a month, sometimes more, sometimes less.
Is it part of your job to review complaints that are submitted with respect to the landfill?
Yeah, yes.
Specifically, have you taken a closer look at odor-related complaints?
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about what you found when you were reviewing those?
Yes, because we've gotten a lot of complaints, the past several years, and obviously that's a concern. But what we have noticed is, so from 2000 to 2018, in the ADEQ database, there were a total of 7 complaints against the Eco-Vista landfill. 2019, when we filed our permit application, until the end of 2023, in the ADEQ database that I was able to add up, there were 186. Now I heard Ron Hayden testified that, I think he said 371, but he said that they were adding individual complaints and some of them that they had multiple complaints from the same person per day. So they were adding each one like that. The way I added them up was one complaint per day, even if someone had multiple complaints, that was just one, is how I added them up. So by the end of, so from 2019 to 2023, there were 186 complaints, as opposed to 7. But when I was looked at it, 102 of the 186 complaints were from 6 people. Of the 102, from the 6 people, 71 were from 2 people. And that seems significant.
And I said specifically odor-related complaints, but I don't know, I may have been wrong about that. Was this everything or just?
That's mostly those are odor, litter, and mud on the road complaints.
Has anything operationally that you're aware of changed at the landfill to account for that?
No, we haven't had really anything operational.
I understand. Is she gonna give testimony or provide testimony beyond those 2 subjects?
Beyond odor and litter, yes.
Yes, okay.
And in fact, we're done with that.
All right,
It was really about the complaints. You had asked some questions.
all right. I'm sorry. I'm gonna overrule your objection, Mr. Nolan. Please proceed.
So pivoting to groundwater monitoring, are you familiar with the groundwater monitoring at the site?
Yes, I oversee the consultants and review the reports.
Tell me a little bit more about what that involves, your particular role.
Okay, so, it's written in our permit that we would have to do the groundwater monitoring, so I hire the consultants to do that. So we have a set of consultants that collect the groundwater, and then we have a set of consultants that do the statistical analysis, and then we have a set of consultants that write the reports. So I'll work with those consultants, and then once they, to make sure that they are sampling on the time that needs to be sampled, and make sure that they sample the wells that need to be sampled, because we have several different monitoring protocols and several different types of analysis that have to be done. And then once it's all done and the statistical analysis is complete, I make sure that the report is done in a timely manner and submitted to the department in time. I review the report to make sure there's no issues, and then we submit it to the Department of Environmental Quality.
Are you keeping an eye out for outliers in terms of your data as you do that?
Yeah, we don't need to make any adjustments to the monitoring, or if we do have any issues, then we have to go back and resample to make sure that there weren't any anomalies.
So we've heard some testimony already about the leachate collection system, and I don't want to belabor it, but is it your understanding that the cell is designed kind of like a bathtub?
Yes.
Where does the leachate end up?
The leachate goes into the leachate collection system. Each cell has an individual sump where the leachate is collected, and then it's pumped into our leachate tank where it's pre-treated, and then it goes to the NACA wastewater treatment plant.
Is that leachate part of your groundwater monitoring?
It is, as part of the assessment, monitoring, and corrective action that we do, we monitor the leachate collection system and the leak detection system. So we have automatic readers on our leachate collection system and our leak detection system. So each day, one of Blake's operators goes around and reads the leachate collection system. Each sump has a readout on it. So he'll go around and take the reading from the leachate collection system. And then there's a separate readout for the leak detection system. So we go around and we read those each day to make sure that they're where they should be. If we go and we see that the number is way off, then we know we have an issue and we need to figure out what's going on with that particular system. And then once we record that, we put it in, they bring it back and they put it in a spreadsheet. And then that spreadsheet is submitted to DEQ each month with a monthly groundwater report.
So let's break it out a little bit. Why monitor what's in the leachate itself? First of all, where does that leachate end up?
That leachate goes to be pre-treated, and then it goes to the NACA wastewater treatment plant.
So why do you monitor what's in it?
we, for this purpose, we monitor what's in the leachate collection system because we use that to compare it to what's in the leak detection system and then what's in the groundwater wells for the monthly monitoring to see if any of that leachate has leaked out and gotten into the leak detection system or if it's getting into the groundwater wells.
So when you test the leak detection system, first of all, if there's liquid in that, does it mean that the liner is leaking?
No, we have water in the leak detection system because there's going to be condensate that builds up, from the pressure of the soil and the liners down there between the plastics. And also, when we put that equipment in and when we calibrate the equipment, we pump water down in there. So there's already water in the leak detection system. But if we did sample it and we see that there's some leachate constituents in that water, then that's how we would know there's a puncture in the liner. But we haven't seen that yet.
And is that going to indicate that the entire liner is leaking if you find that?
No, it would just indicate there was a puncture in that area. And
That's a
we're,
bad question.
yeah, we sample it cell by cell. So, we have cell 1, cell 2, cell 3. We're able to sample each cell.
Where is the leak detection system in terms of the composition of the liner?
We do have the double liner system because we're in the karst environment. So we have the leachate collection system, and then the leak detection system is underneath it, and it's between the two liners.
And at the risk of belaboring the point, if you found something in that leak detection system, does it mean that bottom liner has been breached?
No, it means the liner.
Ms. Reynolds, do you recognize this map?
Yes, that is a map of our groundwater monitoring system.
And I don't have the doc ID for this, or actually this may not be a doc ID. I think this is a demonstrative. Who put these circles on here that you can't really see?
I put the red circles around the groundwater monitoring wells.
And let me back up for a minute. I'm not sure I asked you you did say how often you test each of the leak detection system and the leachate?
Yeah, monthly. I don't know if I did or not.
Well, let me back up. So how often do you test the leachate?
Monthly.
And how often do you test the leak detection system liquid?
Monthly.
And I got myself confused. So let's go back to this now. Who put the red circles on here?
I did.
And what do they designate?
Those are the wells that we test monthly.
So what are wells on this map? How are they being shown?
The wells are the blue circles.
What about these blue circles that don't have the red circles around them? How often do you test those?
Those are tested quarterly. And then, so the wells with the red circles are tested monthly. And then all the wells, even those with the red circles, have another protocol where we do different constituents quarterly. And then we have a different protocol that we do with all the wells again semi-annually.
If the administrative law judge were to modify the permit to require monthly testing of these remaining wells, would Eco-Vista have any objection to that?
Objection, I call for speculation.
I'm not overrule the objection. Can you answer that, ma'am?
No, I mean, we wouldn't have any problem at all to add those new wells to the monthly protocol. That wouldn't be any problem. Right now we're testing all the wells in red monthly for the groundwater impact parameters. So we test for ammonia, chloride, specific conductance and pH. Because that's specifically for leachate to see if any leachate's getting out.
Sorry, can I hold up for a second? So what does the permit require right now in terms of sampling and analysis for those wells quarterly?
Quarterly, yeah, we're doing quarterly right now. Yeah.
I apologize, Ms. Paul. Please proceed.
And you also do testing at Wildcat Creek, right?
Yes, but that's only twice a year.
Why is the testing at the creek and not SP6 that we've been talking about during this proceeding?
Yeah, we actually sample in the creek. We pull the sample from the creek itself because SP6 is the spring itself, and it's not always flowing. So there's not always a flow of water coming out of the spring. So we have to get the sample from the creek to be able to reliably get a sample every time.
If the administrative law judge were to modify the permit to require monthly testing at Farming Creek, would Eco-Vista have any objection to that?
Not at all. We could do that too.
Of all the testing that you do, have you had any sampling that indicated that leachate is escaping from a lined area of the site?
No, not since I've been working at Waste Management.
So we've talked a little bit about going out to the site, but do you recognize this? You can see it.
Yes. I can't see anything anymore. Oh, yes, that's the spring map.
So is there any reason why you spend time specifically kind of in this area of the site where we've got those? Well, first of all, what do the green triangles designate?
Those are the springs that FTN identified during the dot trace survey.
So do you have reason to spend time in that area of the landfill?
Yes, we have a wildlife habitat area, which is actually the fun part of my job. So I get to go out and hang out in the woods and get away from the landfill.
So do you spend a fair amount of time out there?
Yes, that's part of our forested area. So we manage that area for invasive species and monitor wildlife.
And for the sake of the record, I'm going to identify that this is figure 5.2 from document 78620. So were there any changes to this part of the landfill site leading up to 2020?
Yes, they started the wildlife certification process around 2009, which was before my time. And back then, that area was really, really thick with invasive species, a lot of privet and greenbrier and, dewberries and things like that. It was very thick. It was really hard to get through. When I came on in 2013, I started working with Ozark Ecological. It's a company up there, and they do a lot of control burns to help manage the invasive species. So we started doing more control burns in 2016. I think we've done 4 so far, and it's taken out a lot of the underbrush. So we have a nice canopy. You can actually walk through that area. So since 2016, it's cleared out pretty much all the underbrush in that area. So it's a lot more accessible. But that's just, that's a portion of it. And then further to the east, and I can't remember exactly the time period it happened. It might have been 2014, 15. One of the managers before Blake decided he wanted to pond. So he went back out there and scraped out some of that area and pulled out some trees and unsuccessfully made a big mess is what he did. But it cleared out a lot of that. And so he took care of some of my invasive species, but he made a big mess in the process.
So is it fair to say by 2020, that area was a lot more accessible than it had been in
Yeah.
2015? Is
Yes.
that? All right, so I'm showing you another part, we're still in document 78620. This is Appendix C. You see what this purports to be?
Photographs of the springs and seeps.
So we're gonna go through these relatively quickly, but tell me to slow down if I need to.
Okay.
Well, I say relatively quickly. We've got too much of a lag for us to go relatively
And I
quickly.
don't think.
There you go. Are those photographs reflective of what that area looks like all year round?
No, it looks that way in the spring.
What's the difference?
Those pictures were taken at the end of April, May. So, when it's wet, so it'll look that way in the spring and maybe in the fall and winter, but then it'll dry out during the summertime.
So we've heard some during this proceeding about some inspections that were done at Eco-Vista during the first quarter of 2023. Are you familiar with those inspections?
Yes.
What's your involvement?
When we have inspections, I respond to the inspections. I work with the site, as they make the corrections, and then I take the information and write the written response and work with DEQ to make sure they're happy with the response.
And specifically, did you do that with respect to those inspections?
Yes.
Oh. There were more pictures than I thought. All right, can you see this? Need it bigger?
Yeah. Now I can see it.
What is this?
This is the cover email for the response.
All right, here's the letter that was associated with them, correct?
Yes.
Did you do a summary of what the purported violations were or alleged violations were?
Yes, as Mr. Hayden stated, I think it was the day before yesterday, they did a series of inspections. So instead of answering each one, I waited until they did several and made a summary. And as you can see, some days they came out on consecutive days, and then, some days they skipped around and came out and waited a few days in between inspections.
And we can go to other parts of your letter if you need a refresher, but do you remember what rules there were alleged violations of?
Generally, it was either leachate seeps or cover defects.
With respect to the leachate, can you tell me what types of violations were or alleged violations they were seeing? Was it leachate coming out of the bottom of the liner or something other than that?
No, and again, this was in March, and in the letter, I did note that at the time of the inspection, we had, I think, 7 to 9 inches of rain. So we had quite a bit of rain during that time, and we had rain during the time of inspection. So they noted leachate seeps from the active intermediate areas. So when ADQ references a leachate seep, that's not leachate coming out of closed areas of the landfill from the liner. That's leachate that's coming from the surface of the landfill where in areas that haven't been closed and haven't been lined. So it's just coming back up from the trash, just seeping back up. And that's what they've noted. Some of them they just noted some areas of puddled water because it had been raining and the heavy equipment will drive around and, make ruts, and it may have like a sheen to it, so they may call that leachate because it's contact water. So it'll just be standing water on the landfill. And then of course the cover defects, when it's rained as much as 7 to 9 inches, and you have heavy equipment and dozers driving around on top of mud, after you've covered the trash, then it's going to uncover the trash because, the mud's pressing away from it. So that's what had happened. And, if you can go back to the letter. So we were able to correct. You can go to the second page and blow up that table. I made a list of the, let's see, or the summary of findings in our response. We were noted to have deficiencies, and, the requirement isn't that we're not going to have HAC, or cover defects, it's that we'll promptly repair them. And
Let's go
we're,
to the rule. I talked about that. All right, so I've pulled up rule 22.411, and if we scroll all the way down to O. I don't know if I can show the whole text at once, but. Okay, can you read? Yeah, it'll come back. There we go. Is that big enough to read?
yeah, it says the owner or operator shall be responsible for maintaining the cover system integrity and shall promptly repair erosion, washout, tracking, or other defects that result in exposed refuse in either daily or intermediate cover or exposure of the barrier system of the final cover. Areas of leachate seepage or areas exhibiting evidence of leachate seepage. Something in discoloration. Yeah,
Not blocked on mine, so I can't fix it.
of the cover system shall also be promptly repaired. Basically, leachate seep should also be promptly.
So when there's heavy rain, are these kind of normal operating issues that you have to address?
Yeah, yes, it is. It is. I mean, they're normal issues we deal with during the rain. And we were able to get all of those repaired within 24 to 48 hours, which to me is promptly, especially when we're having the rain during the time we're trying to make those repairs.
All right, and there were a couple of alleged violations that related to a leachate collection system. Do you remember what that was about? I think there was an alarm going off at a leachate collection system. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Or go to your letter?
Yes, that goes back to the sump where we take the readings on our leachate collection system. If we have over 12 inches of head on the leachate system, it just gets too deep. We have an alarm, a red alarm that starts going off, and that red alarm was going off because we had so much rain. We just needed to pump faster. So we kicked up the pump and pumped it out to the treatment system faster.
Were you here when Mr. Tallhammer testified?
Yes, yes,
Do you remember him referencing community right to know requirements?
yes.
Can you tell me how Eco-Vista complies with community right to know requirements?
Yes, for my part, we do the EPCR reporting, the emergency planning and community right to know planning for the SARA Tier 2. So each month right now, I'm working on our reporting that's due by March 1st to the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management for each one of our sites. Particularly for Eco-Vista, we report certain chemicals and quantities of chemicals that we have on site electronically to the Department of Emergency Management. So they have that information publicly available, and I believe they distribute it to the fire departments and other entities. And so they know if there is an emergency, where the chemicals are and what the quantities of the chemicals are, like such as our diesel fuel tank. You know, if they do have to come on site during an emergency and they can't get a hold of someone, that record still is somewhere where they can access it.
I'll pass the witness.
Thank you, Ms. Bold. DQ, any questions? Mr. Nolan?
Got anything to do with site groundwater monitoring network?
No, I don't.
Anything to do with the development of conceptual sidewalk facilities?
No, we have our consultants do that.
I'm sorry.
No, we rely on our consultants for that.
Familiar with any plans to notify the public in the event of a large scale fire?
For the fire? No.
Well, don't take this the wrong way, Charles, but I don't have any questions for you either. And it has nothing to do with the quality of your testimony whatsoever.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Lester?
Your Honor, at this point, this would like to earlier motion under section 205 to include arguments based on 22.11.
The slightly deaf individual would appreciate the microphone. Can you?
Eco-Vista would like to amend its pending motions based on section 205B2, the failure to raise in public comment argument, to include the argument that appeared to perhaps be raised in this hearing for the first time of a failure to comply with 22.1102E4.
All right, thank you, Mr. Heister. Mr. Nolan?
I don't know if I need to repeat the entirety of my argument from the beginning. I can go retrieve it, but we went through the record, every mention of dye testing in cars. And then we looked at chapter 11, which addresses dye testing and conceptual model. And that chapter 11 is also the source of the requirement to identify landfill derived chemistry as soon as possible. We've just had a whole trial regarding groundwater monitoring and how modeling influences that. Those things are inextricably linked, and of course are now, I think, properly before the administrative law judge.
DQ, any response? I'm going to go ahead and deny it, Mr. Heister, but I'm going to ask you, when we do have post-hearing briefs, go ahead and put it in there anyway, so I can have it in the back of my mind. Mr. Nolan, you can go ahead and respond to it as well. As opposed to, I'd like to have a little bit more of an opportunity to carefully review it and digest it as opposed to just making a decision on the fly. Folks, you can have closing arguments, but honestly, I think it's the proverbial dead horse at this point. But I will give you the opportunity if you would like. What's the preference of counsel? Mr. Nolan?
Certainly prepared to give one.
If you're prepared and you want to, then how about it, Mr. Nolan? Go ahead.
I will go quickly. How about that?
Oh, go quickly, go slowly.
Well, then
Please
thank you
proceed.
for recognizing me. We have two major issues remaining: fire, including planning for control and response and communications, and groundwater, particularly modeling and monitoring. Our first witness was Mr. Todd Tallheimer, who testified, as you asked him, that the planning documents for fire control and emergency communications do not meet the minimum requirements 22.411 and 22.416 for fire control planning. Specifically, it's Mr. Tallheimer's testimony that the fire control plan must have written plans on how to establish incident command. There's no indication that Eco-Vista has determined what resources the local fire departments have available, or that there is consistent training both on site and with local fire departments. There's nothing in the record showing the site knows what the flow of water available to it is or how a major response would influence that flow of water. There's no early warning or detection system such as fire rover to prevent a small fire from growing out of control into an unmanned site on, say, Saturday night. Fire-specific PPE is not available at a cache on site, and there's no personnel there that's trained how to use such equipment. Plans on how to address the personnel during a response involving heavy equipment aren't there, leading to a safety issue. Mr. Trollheimer was also heavily critical of the emergency communications plan, which is simply a list of phone numbers and confirmation that the site has a telephone on site. The plan does not define who and in what order is communicated with during a catastrophic event, and gave an example of not seeing how seeing a major event supposed to be reported to someone like the mayor of the nearest town so that proper city resources may be deployed. There's no plan on how to communicate with the community regarding a major incident. This is an especially large concern with the Class 1 landfill that contains many hazards. This is a real concern and a threat to the community, but we have no defined plan on how to respond. Established means of communication between the site and the fire department need to be established to prevent that catastrophe. One of the big issues here is that no one is preparing these fire and communication plans has fire experience. Ms. Bott does not, and she was responsible for the operating plan. But it appears those documents are simply a cut and paste job from what was already in the record. Mr. Hayden and Mr. Conrad were relying on FTN to prepare the document, as they did not provide any expertise for the preparation of those plans. Finally, Mr. Small may have some fire background, but he did not participate in the preparation of those documents. Mr. Small provided us with factual testimony regarding on-site actions, but the information provided in Eco-Vista exhibits pertains largely to heavy equipment, maintenance, and fire prevention. The materials are not high-level planning for a catastrophic event for incident command and response, which is exactly what this facility needs to protect human health and the environment. More importantly, the documents that Mr. Small discussed are not in the record. We're bound by the record. ADEQ didn't consider them and therefore could not issue a permit based upon them. Stated alternatively, the city of Tontitown can't appeal Waste Management's internal guidance on heavy equipment maintenance as it relates to fire. We have to appeal the permitting decision and what was in the record. Mr. Small testified in his deposition he is fact witness. The only expert opinion on Rule 22 compliance and fire that you have in the record is that of Mr. Tallheimer, who says these plans don't meet the minimum. As Mr. Tallheimer testified, fire is a reality at landfills, and planning is a must to prevent an operational fire from becoming a catastrophic event. Our second expert witness was Mr. Steve Hart, and the opposition has been critical of Mr. Hart rendering an opinion based on the number of hours he has put in. But when I asked Mr. Conrad if he had reviewed the history of the site, he said no. When I asked Mr. Sadler if he reviewed the history of the site before issuing this permit, he said no. When I asked Ms. Vaught if she had reviewed the history of the site before approving the monitoring plan and stamping, she said no. And when I asked Ms. Darrington if she had reviewed the most recent die trace summary in the year since it was issued, she said no. So Mr. Hart may very well be the only one involved here that has a handle on the big picture that is before us, which is a continued return to the mean of the previous understandings of the site after discounting die trace studies and reverting to the concept that the groundwater flow is only to the southeast and that it's probably slow and not through solution features or conduit flow, when the evidence, the record is showing again and again that that is not the case. So again, Mr. Hart testified that despite 25 plus years of studies, no single comprehensive site model exists as required by Rule 22, Chapter 11. In fact, the models switch back and forth on their findings, seemingly returning to an outdated understanding. The groundwater moves slow, not through conduits and solution features, towards the southeast, where the evidence repeatedly shows radial flow, often very quickly off-site. Many of the die trace findings were discounted for various reasons over the years, which may have stopped further investigation and understanding of the site. However, most important here to this permitting decision is that the model was moving forward in the 2020 investigation, which called for a die trace study, only to move inexplicably backwards in 2021 die trace study work plan, saying the flow was only to the southeast. and that springs in the area do not reliably produce water sufficient to study. Now, of course, the actual execution of the 2022 dye testing showed that those assertions were not true. So we again attempted to retreat from the facts in the 2021 plan, only to have them changed again by the 2022 dye trace study. The 2022 dye trace test, of course, proved, Ms. Darrington, the geologist who prepared the 2020 investigation report and the 2021 dye trace study plan, didn't bother to look at those results. So despite the 2020 investigation report calling for an update to the conceptual site model, it didn't happen after the dye trace study results. DEQ points to the permit language as a site model. That is not a comprehensive site model signed by a professional geologist as required by Chapter 11 of Rule 22. That is prepared by the applicant, not the agency. So what are the consequences of poor site model that is not fully developed and ignores dye tracing results? It's an inadequate monitoring program pursuant to Chapter 12. Mr. Hart testifies that only 6 wells are shown to be hydrologically connected to the site, and that most of those wells are to the northeast. A full site model surveying springs, wells, and other features in fully developed document meeting all the requirements of Chapter 11 of Rule 22 would inform better monitoring, including reaching out further into the surrounding area to monitor wells and springs that are shown by dye tracing to actually be connected to the site. That's the key. Monitoring points with connection to the site, and we lack those, especially to the south and the northwest. The monitoring plan is simply not sufficient to detect the leak as soon as possible in storm or normal flows in this challenging karst topography. We have experts identify major issues that present current concerns for human health and the environment. Mr. Tallhammer tells us that preventing a minor fire incident from going major and impacting surrounding communities is planning. Plans like that are not present in the record. Mr. Hart points to karst topography is difficult and that many people in this area are relying on groundwater for primary and secondary uses in an area where groundwater is connected with surface water in many places, not yet well tested or understood by the applicant or the agency. This is too major of a concern for human health and the environment, one which is not adequately understood or monitored here. The minimums of Rule 22 are not met. We ask that you remand the permit with directions to comply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. And specifically, when you do your post-hearing brief, in terms of, I know what you're going to ask, you've already asked for the remand with directions. I need to know what those directions are going to be, because in some instances, when I was pressing for information, I wasn't getting clarity on exactly what it is that your clients are looking for. For example, as we sat here today, Eco-Vista's offered to, or would not be opposed, I should say, to monthly monitoring both of the wells that are in question as well as Wildcat Creek. Is that sufficient for your client? You don't have to answer that right now. I'm positing that. All right. Who's next? DEQ, Eco-Vista. Ms. Thompson.
Yes, Your Honor. We've been here for the last 3 days about a permit appeal. The whole question is whether DEQ issued the Class 1 Eco-Vista permit pursuant to Arkansas laws and Environmental Rule 22. Now, I can break down all of the rules that were concluded in order number 5 on the remaining issues, and I'll try to do that briefly. Starting with the general operating requirements, 411, 422, 416, air quality concerns. DEQ followed Rule 22 in issuing the permit regarding emergency response. Regarding Rule 22 has a generalized section on that. All you have to have is a phone number, an emergency response. It requires an adequate telephone communication system in the event of fire or other emergency situations that may arise at the landfill. This is a landfill permit. It's a solid waste facility permit. You heard testimony from Mr. Small, basically talking about the emergency preparedness plan that Eco-Vista they have other training that they do with their employees. It was a rather robust plan from what I heard, from what DEQ heard. And again, you can review his testimony. Regarding the fire 22.416, Rule 22 just basically asks that there shall not be any open burning or posing a fire hazard. Rule 22 does not require a fire plan per se. It doesn't require one. DEQ inspectors are not fire investigators. Now, in regards to all of the geology, Rule 22.1201, 22.1101, and 407. Rule 22.1102E does not explicitly state where the dye test study must be conducted on the landfill or require a municipal solid waste landfill to perform a dye test during a hydrological inspection. It states that these landfills may be required to perform additional studies in order to adequately characterize the site. And this appears to grant DEQ the agency to decide if a dye trace study is in fact necessary. In the case of the 2022 dye trace study, it was determined that enough dye tracing had been done near the proposed expansion to warrant picking a more scientifically sound location to inject the dye. This decision was validated by strong positive results seen at Wildcat Creek, which provided closure to the decades-old discussion regarding fast flow to the northwest that Mr. Sadler testified to. 1102E4 does not specify that the location must be within the proposed expansion area. Regarding the conceptual site model, petitioners continually brought up the need for an appropriate conceptual site model and claimed that they couldn't find one in the record. As stated in testimony from Bill Sadler and Dana Darrington, the geotechnical and hydrogeological investigation reports contain all the relevant studies, graphs, data, and the model is necessarily a summary that is intended to aggregate the information without needing to be a multi-page narrative. It changes. Mr. Sadler and Ms. Darrington both testified regarding the conceptual site model. Additionally, the petitioners presented no example of what they would consider an appropriate site model. All of the dye test studies were conducted by summarized and reviewed by geologists, either considered foremost experts in the field of karst hydrogeology, have specific backgrounds in, or many years to decades of work in karst hydrogeology. And the petitioner's expert witness admitted both to having no dye trace experience in karst terrain and to never having been to the site during his deposition or during his testimony. Site visits are essential, as you've heard from the geologist in the past couple of days, for understanding the underlying geologic conditions. And then this is evidenced by the petitioner's witness's mischaracterization of the well documented in Stutz Pond as being a sinkhole. Despite this area having been surveyed many times by the above mentioned expert hydrogeologists, I believe they mentioned Ogden, Brahana. The petitioner's witness did not acknowledge the inherent uncertainty present with the methodology used for dye testing in springs and streams and discussed at length in the summary reports. And I believe that from my brief memory, that Mr. Sadler did testify regarding the difficulty with the springs and the streams, and I believe Ms. Darrington did as well. This petitioner's witness's claims that a positive dye trace must be confirmed at a monitoring well for it to be a valid monitoring location has already been proven incorrect. We heard that from Mr. Sadler yesterday, and again, we heard that today from Ms. Darrington. Decades of groundwater data and corrective action at the facility, including the actual release of leachate from excavated pre-subtitle D waste in approximately 2015, that was discussed by witness Darrington, have confirmed the monitoring system's ability to detect groundwater chemistry changes around the landfill. So I believe after hearing the testimony, analyzing any post briefs that you have, the attorney's draft, I feel that DEQ, that we did follow Arkansas law and Arkansas rule at this time on all of petitioners' claims. Thank you.
Ms. Thompson, before you step away from the lectern, so just to shift in terms of your closing on the fire safety. Unless I'm missing something, the only express rule that I see is fire safety 22.416, which is the air criteria. And it's 416C, fire safety facility or practice shall not pose a hazard to the safety of persons or property from fires. And it says this may be accomplished through compliance with this section and through the periodic application of cover material and other techniques as appropriate.
Yes.
You, like me, have sat here for the last 3 days. It just seems to me that the fire safety or the fire prevention plan or emergency plan may be sufficient for, as I was asking Mr. Small, within the fence line, but not necessarily outside the fence line. And we know that there are numerous residents. Does that cause you some concern?
I understand what Your Honor is asking me at this time. However, I believe that Mr. Small testified that they had a contact list with phone numbers to contact. Taz Environmental was one of them that he mentioned. I am not, I don't know. I'm not an authority in any kind of fire or emergency response, Judge. So,
Thank you, Ms. Thompson.
thank you.
Mr. Heister, Holden?
Your Honor, I think Ms. Thompson eloquently summed up the status of most of the evidence. I guess I very much view the city's case as one that relies upon a Rule 22 and evidence that simply don't exist. Now, with respect to the groundwater monitoring, there's a challenge to the conceptual hydrogeological model that's built on bad science. I mean, you heard the plaintiff's only expert concede he couldn't find the conceptual hydrogeologic model. How can you criticize something you cannot find? Ms. Darrington, I think, went into a lot of detail as to where it was, what she'd updated, what you didn't need to update. And, again, I think the plaintiff's expert simply did not devote the time that a matter of this complexity requires. It's important to remember something like the positive dye test study in 2022. That was done because of Eco-Vista and DEQ. That pathway was discovered without any help from Mr. Hart or anybody else. The Rule 22 process is working as intended, and the understanding of the site is evolving as the location of the landfill operations moves slightly. Now, it's not moving for the Class 1 expansion area, but it is for the Class 4. I think Mr. Hart testified time and again, we need to look at it all together. And any information about the site hydrogeology is helpful, even if it doesn't have immediate application to the Class 1 expansion underway, which, as you know, has been exhaustively studied. Dr. Brahana, in one of the documents we showed you, said back in 2014 that the dye testing data set with respect to that property, when combined with what he had done at Savoy, was some of the most robust dye tracing information in Northwest Arkansas. So, and we're talking about the Eco-Vista site, where Dr. Brahana described kind of the quality of his work and those of his predecessors. With respect to the groundwater monitoring network, again, that network has been established over time on the basis of advice from some of the most preeminent experts kind of in this area. Mr. Hart was quick to criticize their scientific judgments, relying on the argument that he thought that there was only valid information coming from maybe 6 of those wells. what he never did explain was the 6 wells he identified were all ones added by Dr. Brahana in 2012 to test one particular landfill expansion. And they showed up on that dye test. But as the other, as the working geologists who've been out there to the site, who've drilled wells, who've actually looked at what's underneath the surface, have told you there are multiple ways to confirm whether a groundwater well is giving you validity. And as DEQ and Mr. Sadler pointed out, the rule speaks in terms of monitoring wells. It doesn't talk in terms of monitoring springs, and it imposes a point of compliance with that's very close to the landfill site. And that this is done under the RIPRA framework. It's not done under some 1989 guidance that was written. Well, I call it guidance charitably. I mean, it's a position paper whose own author admits some of his positions are controversial. And it was peer reviewed, or at least reviewed by Dr. Brahana, who performed the right work here, who we can safely assume was very familiar with the pros and cons of sampling springs versus well networks. And again, if you go back to the record, we showed you a statement from Dr. Brahana where he addresses specifically that issue and says here, he didn't think that there were springs to monitor. What should be monitored were the groundwater monitoring well network that he was working on. So I think the attack on that, the request for monitoring in locations that plaintiff's own expert provided no evidence to the commission that have any hydrogeological connection to the landfill will generate data. And as Mr. Sadler said, at some level, data is always good, but we have to know what the data is telling us. And the fact that someone in Tontitown has something in their drinking water doesn't tell us anything about what's going on under Eco-Vista. And so there's been no showing that even if the commission had the regulatory authority to require that kind of offsite sampling, that it would tell you anything about what's going on at Eco-Vista. Conversely, if they're in the unfortunate case of a release, we do know the existing system with the leachate collection and the leak detection and the groundwater monitoring wells right there on the perimeter. They would detect that, and the agency and Eco-Vista could take appropriate action. With respect to fire, another popular topic of discussion, I think your commission question, Ms. Thompson, precisely tracks my notes. As I look through, based on what I can find in the rules, it's 411K. And 411K says you need to have a phone system or a communication, or some way to communicate in case there's a fire. And it says you need to have an emergency response plan. And somewhere in Mr. Tallhammer's world, emergency response plan became a fire response plan. And that's not what the rule says. It needs to be an emergency response plan. And I think as Mr. Small testified, most emergencies out at the landfill aren't fire related. They're most often, I think he said, they're medical emergencies and they're weather emergencies. I think the agency wisely requires an emergency response plan that it touches upon a variety of kinds of emergencies, and not one that kind of myopically focuses on a single kind. And if when the commission goes back to look at Mr. Tallhammer's testimony, I think you'll see he was not familiar with what Eco-Vista does, and could not and did not criticize what Eco-Vista does because of that. What he did was provide a kind of a laundry list of what he believes would be best practices for facilities. So when you look at his testimony, there's no conclusion that what Eco-Vista is doing is not adequate, because he doesn't know. Now, the only other, so there's no dispute, there is an emergency response plan. And there is no dispute that, as you've heard from Mr. Small, Eco-Vista's fire response planning training and equipment is in extremely capable hands. You know, as Ms. Reynolds pointed out, the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act was enacted under, I think, a Superfund reform. And Mr. Tallhammer keeps throwing it out there as if the DEQ as if DEQ has something to do with that. And I don't know if that was, I don't know where that was coming from, but it's as she ably pointed out, there are separate federal requirements that require the inventories of those certain materials, facility maps and whatnot that have to be provided to kind of local first responders and whatnot. But at the risk of stating the obvious, this is not an emergency planning and community EPRA, I think, compliance case. And again, and Mr. Tallhammer did not testify that our EPRA, but we were not compliant with EPRA. And if anything, Your Honor, perhaps you should cue in on the fact that, as Ms. Reynolds pointed out, things like the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, it's publicly available, and Mr. Tallhammer hadn't bothered to review what the facility has on file. He just kind of threw that out there in his laundry list of things he isn't sure are being met. The other requirement for fire is 416. It's cover. And I think no one seriously disputed that Eco-Vista has a cover maintenance program. You heard from Mr. Small how on a day-to-day basis it's implemented. I don't know that there's really a dispute there that a cover program exists, that the cover materials are authorized by DEQ. Again, you heard from Mr. Tallhammer how we shouldn't be using the auto shredder fluff when his own full-time employer, California, which traditionally takes a pretty firm stand with respect to environmental management, they authorize auto shredder fluff. And the auto shredder fluff authorization pre-exists this permit. So, if DEQ needs to change its rules, there's a process for that, but it's not this permit proceeding. We're certainly sensitive to the ALJ's concern about the broader community. However, the size of this site, it's over 600 acres. There is no history of the catastrophic fires that Mr. Tallhammer so ably scared us all in his discussion. Again, there's no indication of inadequate planning or training in Eco-Vista that would substantiate a concern that a fire like that is a realistic concern. Mr. Tallhammer provided no sort of scientific analysis or appraisal that demonstrated that Eco-Vista presents any greater fire risk. And maybe he could have done that statistically. I don't know what he could have done, but he didn't actually provide any scientific analysis whatsoever to support a finding that Eco-Vista and its practices put it more at risk than any other Class 1 facility in the state. And again, you heard again kind of a parade of horribles about the talk, the smoke that could be released and everything else. You saw no quantification of that. You saw no sort of air data to suggest how much particulate matter gets released in a Class 1 fire. It's all kind of blank speculation on Mr. Tallhammer's part. So we look forward to the post-hearing briefing. Hopefully we can set up a briefing schedule before we leave. And I will. I would very much appreciate your attention in this matter.
Before you step away, I appreciate you bringing me back. I was trying to remember which one it was, 411. And I appreciate you bringing me back to that because I was focusing on 416. You remember when I was questioning Mr. Sadler and he was speaking in terms of the vast majority of these class one landfills are kind of away from folks. They're secluded, they're separated. This one's somewhat unique in terms of being in the middle of an area that has residents surrounding it. You may very well be right, Mr. Heister, in terms of looking at the rules, they are thin. I will freely admit that, and Mr. Tallhammer admitted it as well when I was questioning him. And that doesn't, from a lead, I'm under, as I've said before, I'm under the yoke of both statute and rule. I can't do more than what it provides. I can't go beyond it because, of course, that would be improper procedure. Again, that's not to just concern.
No, and I think that we have to be careful without competent expert guidance in this area, because one could just as easily make the case, Your Honor, that a class one landfill in a remote area is more at risk for an unchecked large fire, precisely because there aren't as many people around. It's farther from resources. When I deposed Mr. Tallhammer, kind of asked him, what other resources were around besides the city of Tontitown that you check? And he didn't know, which it's in Northwest Arkansas. Fayetteville, there are plenty of fire resources very nearby. He didn't know that, but there are class one landfills that don't have those resources. So I think we have to be careful about what we intuitively think might happen or what the risks are.
I have in the back of my mind the Stumptown fire, the Trafalgar fire, and the fact that we had residents that had to be vacated. That may be apples and oranges to what we have here. And to your point, you're right. There's never been a catastrophic fire at this facility, and heaven forbid there ever is a catastrophic fire. But again, from a planning perspective, it's just a concern. Now, whether or not I have the legal ability to do anything about it, I'll let counsel debate that. Okay. But that's my thought on it. All right. Thank you. I'm glad I did not cut off counsel from their closing statements because all three of you gave excellent ones. All right. Let's go off the record for a second. What do you think, Kara? You think you'll be done by beginning of March? First week in March. Do you think, counsel, that once the transcript is completed and provided to you, that 3 weeks after that would be sufficient to do post-hearing briefs? Or do you need more time? Back on the record. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. All right, we're back on the record. In terms of simultaneous post-hearing briefs, the court reporter has informed me while we're off the record that he anticipates he will have the transcript completed around the first week of March. That poses somewhat of a problem because if I said for 3 weeks from transcript being completed, that would involve spring break. I certainly don't want parents working during spring break. That's not my intent. So, Mr. Nolan, what do you think in terms of if indeed Gary's done the first week of March, what are you looking at in terms of having your post-hearing brief done?
What I said a moment ago, we could just have that next week, something in March, that'd be fine. I think a couple of those will be on or out of pocket that third.
Ms. Thompson, Ms. Sargent, what's your thoughts?
Are you going to ask us to read certain topics?
Am I going to ask you to brief what? What I want you to do is tell me what you think the evidence, the testimony means and how it relates to the rules that are in play. Does that help?
Sure.
What compare and contrast in terms of what the testimony is, and there should be some post-hearing briefs from other dockets. I would suggest you look at Big River Steel, Ms. Thompson. That might be, it may be thick, but it could be helpful. I was trying to think of the most recent one where we had pretty substantive post-hearing briefs, and that might be the closest, nearest one. Shasta, what's your thoughts?
There are a lot of stakeholders for here today. I think the parties have the next several weeks to prepare the legal part of their argument based on the record. I think that's a lot of time to prepare for your brief. I think if we maybe just shoot for 2 weeks after the record is provided, instead of trying to provide a date certain, maybe you're going to get that earlier, maybe not, but 2 weeks from when the record is provided, and at that point, hopefully we're filling in citations and just typing things up. I realize there's a risk that spring break might be implicated, but this is really, really important to indicate the spare space in the facility is going to run out in people based on this technical assessments we get provided. The commission meets on a monthly basis. And so if some of the stuff isn't done, time for you to provide the recommended decision I would like to be able to put together. Run into the problem that the best for forcing the commission to make a decision on emergency solution for the stay. They've already been trying to do that on the operations side. Once that's what the city wanted, so here we are. So I'd say we kind of have to live with that, and let's soldier through to get this done so the commission can get its job.
Shasta, you're always free to file that request and show up at the commission. I mean, you can do it this month if you so desire. There's nothing that prohibits you from doing it. Again, I don't know how they would respond, and I'm sure you've got a guesstimate about when that space is gonna be completed, but I suppose to a certain extent that depends on how much trash comes through the gate, right?
Yeah, it depends on what's
right.
And I don't think calling a guesstimate probably gives enough justice, but I understand where you're working on.
I mean, I'm happy to set it 2 weeks after the transcript is completed, but I also, go ahead, Ms. Thompson.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind you that the environmental law CLE, I believe, is also like the week of, second week of March. It's right before spring break. The environmental law CLE.
That's the CLE, the combination one that you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's in Hot Springs. Who cares? Man, that was on the record too, wasn't it, Gary? That's just terrible.
For the record, Your Honor, I have spring breaks plans too. I'm not proposing it slightly, but the parties have been size city, both small. How important this is, I don't see how I would drag on the heels now something that we're very in the process.
I'm not discounting your client's concern in the least, Mr. Heister, but I also don't want to have ping pong balls going back and forth with requests for extensions and the whole bit. I would rather just have one firm date. So I'm going to hold it to 3 weeks because I just think it's a lot of information for the parties to go through. Again, I appreciate the idea that we have the CLE, we have spring break, we have all that. And if push comes to shove and the parties are having difficulties or problems meeting that deadline, file your motion. I mean, it doesn't really have to be that. You can go ahead and send me an email. I think that would suffice and explain whatever the issues are. If I could get it done, Mr. Heister, next week, I'd be ecstatic, but I don't think that's realistic.
I appreciate attention to this matter. Just so that it's clear beyond the record, the briefing deadline would be 3 weeks from what you're.
I didn't hear the last.
What is your? Is it the?
3 weeks from once the transcript is completed and delivered to you.
Thank you.
So as soon as the court reporter gets the transcript to me, I will immediately send it out to the parties. Now, there is one small hurdle associated with the transcript. My understanding is you are going to get the court reporter and make certain that in terms of the exhibits and the whole bit, he has what he needs to complete the transcript, correct? So it's incumbent upon the parties to get that information to him so he can work as expeditiously as he can to get this transcript completed. All right, any other housekeeping matters that I need to address before we completely go off the record? If not, I thank council, all of you, for your presentations. Extremely professional. I appreciated your work. It was obvious that everybody has put in quite a bit of time and effort in their presentations. And again, I greatly appreciate it. And I thank you all for your professionalism. All right, we're off the record.